Week 34, Overview. Farmers, Populists, Gold Strikes, and Gold Standards. We're still in the Gilded Age, but this week's topics vary depending on the different learning levels. Lower grammar students are going to be learning about the famous Klondike Gold Rush along the Klondike River in Canada, just over the border from America's new Alaskan territory. Upper grammar students will study gold, too, the gold standard that underlay American currency in the late 1800s. Dialectic students will finish up their study of immigration in the Gilded Age, including those who traveled west to become prairie farmers. They'll finally wrap up their 4-week study of one of the most successful immigrants ever, Andrew Carnegie, learning how Carnegie sought to give away his vast fortune near the end of his life. Rhetoric students study the sad plight of American farmers this week. The economics of the rapidly industrializing Gilded Age made it harder and harder for farmers to make ends meet. Many farmers went into debt and then had to sell their farms. We'll learn how they got organized into a new political party to change all that. We don't spend all our time on America, however. Rhetoric students will also begin a 3-week survey of events in the last quarter century in Europe. Readings this week focus on the two young governments of the era, the French Third Republic and the national government of a newly unified Italy. In August 1896, an Indian known as Skookum Jim Mason found gold in the Yukon Territory of Canada, just a few miles from America's new territory of Alaska. That triggered what just may be the greatest gold stampede ever. Americans rushed to find their fortunes in the frozen north. The rush forever altered the economy of Western Canada, Alaska, and the Pacific Northwest. Finding gold just then was a good thing, because gold had become so scarce it was changing American politics. To understand just why, we have to start with America's farmers. Farming, like every other era of commerce, was changing under the impact of the industrial age. New labor-saving machines and transport systems, such as high-speed railroads with refrigerator cars, opened up millions of Midwestern acres to commercial farming. Farmers moved from growing what their family needed to growing one cash crop for these new markets. The problem was that this new farming depended on new machines that saved labor but cost money. Farmers had to borrow heavily in order to afford the machines. Immigrants from Europe were still pouring in, and many moved out west to farm the land. As more acres were cultivated by more efficient tools, prices started to fall. After all that investment, the farms weren't bringing in enough money to pay off their debts. The farmers had to borrow more each year just to stay in business, but their tools and machines wore out a little every year. By the time their machinery was paid off, it was often time to buy new ones, or technological advances made the old machines obsolete. Because of this cycle, many farmers lost their land, and families that wanted to live on farms were forced to the cities to look for factory jobs. In desperation, farmers from all over the nation created a farmers' alliance. Out of this arose a new political party, the People's Party, known as the Populists. It was styled the Party of the Common Man, the true protector of the democratic values and institutions of America. The Farmers' Alliance only took in farmers, farm laborers, mechanics, country school teachers, country doctors, and ministers of the gospel. Women couldn't vote, but they could join the Farmers' Alliance and do all that men could do: organize, hold offices, speak publicly, and so forth. In 1892, these populists gained national attention with their successful congressional gains during the election. In the 1896 elections, they remained strong, but they split over whether they should support their own populist nominee or the Democratic candidate, William Jennings Bryan. Bryan was a man after their own heart, a passionate evangelical Christian whose stirring speech at the Democratic National Convention accused his fellow Democrats of crucifying the common man upon a cross of gold. The populists believed that they had been ignored by the wealthy, sophisticated, and urbanized sections of America who held the power in government. They thought that if poor people all came together, they could get some of their grievances addressed. They fought for the institution of a secret ballot, especially in the South, where Democrats intimidated all those who sought to oppose them. The populists campaigned for women's suffrage and welcomed women as equal members in their ranks. The populists decided to support the Democrats in 1896, when William Jennings Bryan won the nomination. But when Bryan lost the election, many populist leaders became disillusioned and bitter. Overall, populists had a brief but shining moment in American politics. They elected 5 senators, 10 congressmen, and 3 governors, and then they faded from the scene as a viable national party. The populace wanted to get America off the gold standard. Gold is a finite resource, and countries that backed up every dollar with an equivalent amount of gold were limited as to how many dollar bills they could print. If currency is scarce, it's valuable. People thought that if silver, which was less expensive and more abundant, became the standard, the government could print more money and things would be cheaper to buy and sell. Thus, there'd be more money to go around, which meant even common people could have some more of it. Farmers thought that more people would buy their food products if there was more money in circulation. The gold standard pitted creditors against debtors. As the populace organized to fight for free silver, gold became a defining issue of the elections of 1888, 1892, and 1896. The Republican, Benjamin Henry Harrison, was willing to use both gold and silver for a standard. Democrat Grover Cleveland was a gold bug, a firm believer in the gold standard. William Jennings Bryan made that the central issue of his 1896 primary campaign. He organized the Populists and the Silver Democrats to take over the party convention and nominate him for president. His famous speech at the convention whipped the crowd into a frenzy. He said, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." While Bryan's stance thrilled the farmers, whose hopes were being dashed by falling prices, it did nothing for the urban poor. Bryan lost the election of 1896, and the populace lost hope of displacing the two major parties. Many influential people laughed at populism at first, but the populace had the last laugh. Most of their big ideas eventually became law. They wanted an income tax, the direct election of senators, and votes for women. It took 3 constitutional amendments to make it happen, but they got the 16th, 17th, and 19th Amendments. That's as many amendments as the Civil War produced. They wanted the government to put more money into circulation and provide direct aid to the poor, which ultimately resulted in welfare and the Federal Reserve System. They wanted the government to protect consumers from unsafe products and unfair practices. There are now several large federal agencies devoted to these goals, including the Food and Drug Administration, the Commerce Department, and the Federal Trade Commission. The populace wanted government to lend money to poor farmers and even pay them for their crops if no private buyers would pay enough. America has handed out farm subsidies since 1933. Enough on America. Rhetoric students will be keeping an eye on Europe as we wrap up these last 3 weeks studying the 19th century. The United States and France had back-to-back revolutions in the 18th century, but whereas America's experiment in self-government had kept the Union together, despite a bloody civil war, France had to keep on experimenting. France's first republic turned into Napoleon's empire, which was replaced by a constitutional monarchy in 1815. That turned into the Second Republic in the Year of Revolutions, 1848, which morphed into a second empire under Napoleon III. The Prussians attacked France in 1870, and Louis Napoleon Bonaparte lost his crown, resulting in a Third Republic. The Prussians eventually took and briefly occupied Paris. France kept changing its form of government, but at least it maintained a sense of identity. After all, France had been a unified nation-state for centuries. Italy, by contrast, was a patchwork quilt of different localized loyalties that was trying to become a single nation. Things didn't start off well for Italy. Italians in the south revolted against the new, distant central government. Battles raged the first 5 years of the new nation, from 1861 to 1866. More lives were lost in these revolts than in the original War of Unification. The Pope didn't make things easier. Pope Pius IX refused to accept the loss of historically papal territories. In 1871, he called on Catholics everywhere to help him regain his lands, and urged Italian Catholics to refrain from any participation with a new Italian state. It wasn't just Italy's opponents that caused them problems either. Zealous nationalists within Italy made things harder for their new government. They called for Italy to attack France and Austria to regain Italian lands, and they urged Italy to expand across the sea into new colonies. Italy tried to join the scramble for Africa, but was beaten by the Ethiopians. All in all, Italy was a weak and ineffective nation 30 years after its unification in 1861. So, as we've seen this week, America had its share of problems, but it was strong compared to Italy and France. France had gone through 3 republics and 2 empires by this time, while the United States kept chugging along. The U.S. Constitution encouraged disgruntled farmers to get organized to solve their problems. They used ballots instead of bullets to fight for change. Whether you like what the populists accomplished or not, we can thank God that they were able to petition their government for a redress of grievances in a peaceful, constitutional way.